Welcome back. All right, so here's a news of the day video for your Thursday, February the 16th. And no trades as of yet. We still haven't seen anything with Chikrin. We haven't seen anything with Gavrikov. And we're hearing that there's certain guys who may not be on the market. So we'll start with a player who's off the market, Olli Maatta, signing an extension with the Detroit Red Wings today. It's a 2-year extension worth $3 million per season. Maatta had a very good start to the season offensively for Detroit. And honestly, he's had a good year. So I totally understand him wanting to stay in Detroit and Detroit wanting to keep him around. It makes sense. It's a mutually beneficial relationship. And of course, with the Wings being in the hunt for a playoff spot, whether they do or don't make it this year, the reality is that Detroit's at least on the upswing. So I can understand a player wanting to stick around and see how things turn out. Speaking of wanting to stick around, Pierre Dorian has decided that he wants to keep as many of these players on this roster as possible. Including saying that DeBrincat's off the market, so there will not be an Alex DeBrincat trade at the deadline, which makes sense because since they acquired DeBrincat, they've said publicly they want to hold on to him, they want to keep him, sign him to an extension. That would seem to still be the case. I'm not sure where that extension would end up, in that his goal scoring in Ottawa has not been as robust as it was in Chicago. But again, he's producing, he's playing well. Also, Hamonic and Brassard are unlikely to be moved at the deadline. The difference being, obviously, if you made a really nice offer to Dorian, he'd probably take it. But in all likelihood, these guys are probably going to stick around. And it's an argument that we see a lot in the hockey world of, okay, so if you can get a third rounder for this player, is it worth it? And the reality is that when you're getting into third, fourth, fifth rounders, the likelihood of a player reaching the NHL drops with each round, and the likelihood of the player you're drafting in each round becoming as good as the player that you're trading will also drop off too. So I think there's more to it than sometimes what fans give it credit for. But yeah, it sounds like Ottawa's mostly staying put with their players, although Austin Watson's one that's been rumored a lot. So we'll see whether or not Watson ends up getting moved at the deadline. St. Louis news. Brandon Saad moved to the IR. So that means he's going to miss a minimum of a week, but I mean, you can retroactive that date and all that fun stuff. This is to get Jake Neighbors recalled. So Jake Neighbors back with the team. I like Neighbors' work ethic. I think there's some offensive upside there. And so he'll get a chance to show that for St. Louis. Saad on the IR, it's too bad. It feels like Saad gets hurt a lot, though. Pajot is on IR for the Islanders, so the Islanders have recalled Andy Andreoff from the AHL. And yeah, without Pajot, that's going to hurt the Islanders. The Islanders are a team that, on paper, they're good, and they've had points this season where they've looked like they're going to make the playoffs. But the amount of games that they've played in relation to the other teams they're chasing for, one or two playoff spots, the odds of them making the playoffs seem to be dwindling a little bit every day. But Pajot being on the IR likely won't help. We'll see how things go for the Islanders in his absence. The Capitals have been playing without Tom Wilson for a while. They've also been playing without Nick Dowd for a while. The good news is these guys were at practice today. The bad news, it's in non-contact jerseys, which means they're not close to returning to action. The Capitals without Wilson, without Ovechkin, it feels like this has not been a great year for Washington, and that maybe they're going to end up finishing outside of the playoffs, as weird as that might sound. They've been a playoff lock for a long time, but it does feel like things have kind of fallen back for them this year. And then the question becomes one of, if they do miss the playoffs, if you're the general manager, how do you respond to that? Do you double down on this team and say, you know what, we had a lot of injuries, we're fine? Or do you say, you know what, we need to get younger, we need to get more prospects, and you start doing not a hard sell of players, but maybe you sell off a couple for draft picks, and maybe you look to pick up somebody in the offseason who's a little bit on the younger side too. We'll see what the Caps do. It's going to be an interesting offseason and rest of the season for them before that comes around. Sean Monahan has returned to practice for the Montreal Canadiens. He's also in a non-contact jersey. Questions, of course, with Monahan about what's going to happen with him at the deadline. Does he stay in Montreal? Does he sign an extension with Montreal? At one point this year, it looked like an extension was kind of a fait accompli. It was going to happen. And that it feels like that storyline has changed when it comes to Monahan. So him returning to practice is good news. The non-contact jersey, as I mentioned with the others for the Caps, means he's not going to be back likely anytime soon. But just being out there skating is important. So some news for the Ducks here, and this is something that we've seen. I wanted to throw this on the board because this is a debate that I've seen get used a lot on the internet. So Henry Thrun a 2019 pick for the Anaheim Ducks, who's seen as a pretty good prospect and a 21-year-old defenseman. He's not going to sign with the Ducks. He's let him know he's not going to sign with the Ducks. He's going to go to free agency. Now, of course, as a free agent, he has to sign an entry-level contract, think along the lines of what Jimmy Vesey did. But yeah, he's leaving Harvard, and he wants to just have a say in where he goes. Now, because he's in Hartford and Massachusetts and all that, there's some belief that maybe he goes to Boston, and maybe he does. Of course, the Rangers have been known to pick up a player or two that wants to test the market. But then the question becomes one of, do you want to draft a player who's NCAA bound, knowing that this can happen? And I think it's worth the risk. I think there's enough players who have gone the NCAA route, who've still signed with the team that drafted them, that I still think it's worth the risk. And I think when you're looking at Thrun as well, he was a mid-round draft pick. I think he was a fourth rounder in 2019. So it's not a top-notch prospect at the time he was drafted that ends up deciding not to sign. And so, yeah, I don't think this is going to impact things. I think it's something to consider, but that's where you get into like pre-draft interviews and really getting to know these kids before you draft them. And I think that's something you need to do with all of them, with each round. Just, get to know them. You know who you're going to be drafting in each round, and in some way, and maybe you're kind of on the fence, like, okay, in the third round, I think we want to go for this guy. Interview him, give him a call, and just say, look, we're thinking about drafting you, and how do you feel about this? And go through all that. But I'm sure all that gets done by scouts. And yeah, so let me know your thoughts. Do you think the NCAA route means that you shouldn't draft the player, or you should still draft the player and roll the dice? Because they can go to free agency. I would say, and I'm just going to throw this out there, that if players who are drafted who play in the Canadian League, who play whether it's WHL, QMJHL, or OHL, if they decided to go that same route, like if the NHL changed the CBA so that all players who are drafted can choose where they go, I don't know that I would mind that so much. Obviously, it's something that might throw everything on its ear. The team that drafts them would still have the rights to the player for that 3 years, but I honestly don't think that I'd have a problem, just personally anyways, with the young players saying, I think I'll sign somewhere else. And I don't think you would see prime prospects who are drafted in the top 5 wanting to take 3 years and say, well, I don't think I'll go to, say, the Ducks. I'm not going to go with the Ducks. I'll just wait 3 years and go wherever I want. I don't know there's that many players that are going to want to do that. But at any rate, just throwing that out there, let me know your thoughts. I wanted to close things out talking about Erik Karlsson because, again, Carlson talk is everywhere. I keep in mind that it is an $11.5 million cap hit that he carries till 2027. He is having a fantastic year, absolutely amazing year. It is a career year, and it is something that I don't know that hit the rate he's producing with San Jose. He may not continue at that rate with a new team, and I wouldn't bet on that rate being what he scores at next year. Think of like Roman Josi last year for Nashville. Absolutely remarkable. Almost hit the 100-point mark this year. He's back in a more traditional, he's scoring at a more traditional pace for him. So Karlsson does have the full no movement clause too. So that's something to keep in mind. His salary, though, with his $11.5 million cap hit, does drop off towards the end of the contract. It's a $9 million salary in 25-26. And then in 26-27, it's a $7.5 million salary. So that would be attractive to a team that's trying to get to the cap floor and doesn't want to spend the money. They're getting a guy who has an $11.5 million cap hit if they acquire him in 2026, but they only have to pay him $7.5 million. Now, a lot of that is signing bonuses too. The signing bonuses mean Karlsson's contract really isn't one you can buy out. And that's the other thing to consider. It's not like you can take him, we'll just buy him out. You really don't get very much in the way of savings. So I don't think Karlsson moves at the deadline. I'd be kind of surprised if he does. But whichever team would take him on, if that happens, and of course Edmonton's the one that gets rumored a lot because it's a Canadian team and it's Canadian media, but it would definitely require some moves by the Oilers to make that work. Even if San Jose retained money on it, it's still gonna take some work to make that all fit in there. But let me know your thoughts in the comment section below as always. Would you want to see your team trade for Karlsson, keeping in mind the salary cap exists? And again, I think this is a career year for him. It's great. I'm enjoying it. I really think he could very well hit over 100 points this year, but I don't know that that's going to be his production going forward. And I don't know that that production would continue if he went to another, especially a contending team that has a lot of depth. He's not going to play likely as much or as prominent a role. So let me know your thoughts. Hit like and subscribe if you're browsing your way through. You just happened upon this video. Thank you guys so much for watching, for all your support. I will talk to you again soon.